Hello, you awakening wonders. Thank you for watching Stay Free with Russell Brand. It's going to be a fantastic show today. We're talking about France. France is burning. The people are revolting. Infamy, infamy. They've all got it in for me. We're going to be talking to Krystal Ball on the show about a variety of topics. And when we flip over to being exclusively on Rumble, we'll be talking about aspects of the TikTok trial that we wouldn't be able to speak about on YouTube. But first, did you know that Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton went to a Broadway show, and next to them in the aisle were a couple of stools, and I mean with a double O spelling. Have a look at that. We don't know if those fecal deposits were as a result of their attendance or if it's just a coincidence, do we, Gareth Roy, on Screen Assistant?
We don't know if it was them who did it.
It seems odd that it would be one each, and look at them. They've been to see Some Like It Hot, and they seem pretty pleased about something. I would say that's the kind of euphoria that often infects a face after a deposit, Gareth, because you can let me know in the chat and the comments, have you ever known bliss like it? Sometimes when I'm talking like this, you know what I remember is that people tune into this, parts of the mainstream media, with the specific agenda of attacking our show, and they'll say things like, Brand did a poo joke at the beginning. Oh, how rebellious. Well, it's going to get pretty rebellious later because we're going to be talking about the French protests and how it relates to a new emergent globally populist movement where people en masse across the world are becoming so incensed by institutional corruption and hypocrisy that they are taking to the streets. I wonder how these protests are going to play out. I wonder how they're going to affect leaders in your nation. So let's take a second to look at Joe Biden inadvertently tagging neoliberal utopia Canada as the place that it actually is, a sort of little brother and emulator of the Chinese state. Get ready for a Freudian slip from dear Joe Biden. Have a look.
Today, I applaud China for stepping up. Excuse me, I applaud Canada. You can tell what I'm thinking.
It's interesting that he did that in Canada, and it's also odd that Joe Biden's slips and errors have now become almost soundtracked with canned laughter. It's become the sitcom presidency. We've long argued on this channel that almost unconsciously Joe Biden epitomizes the problems with contemporary democracy. He is aged and inept. He is no longer appropriate for use. I'm only talking about Joe Biden as a symbol, because when I say stuff like that, I feel mean because I know he's a human being, and I know like he lost children and all that kind of stuff, and like, so I'm not attacking him as a human being. I'm just talking about as a symbol of the level of corruption and ineptitude, how these models are out of date now. Don't you think that sometimes when you just learn about more wars, more corruption, like, aren't we supposed to be wearing aluminum foil suits by now? Aren't we meant to be evolving towards the next level of humanity by now?
I get why you feel sorry for someone who's old. I understand that. Yeah. But when you talk about wars and you talk about the situation in Yemen or Syria at the moment, there are a lot of other children dying, just to kind of sew up that point.
Thanks, Gal, because I don't like to be mean to people, but you're right. Due to the ongoing involvement of the US military-industrial complex in the war in Yemen, children will probably have been killed today. They probably died today, whose names we will never know due to a geographical quirk. One of the things, though, that encourages me that global change is possible, that there is a global awakening, that new systems could be brought into being that allow us to bypass the entrenchment corruption that all of us live within, even if we're people that are doing okay or if we're people that are suffering terribly, is this conflagration in Paris. Now, we are English, so we've got a long-standing antipathy towards France. It's just sort of casual xenophobia. We've had wars with them for a long time, and my dog's sort of like outside really angry. He's not been allowed in. There is the beast at the periphery right there. This might be good to have that camera. I'd love that from now on. Maybe one of these days. Maybe one of these days. Little Dan, who works here, operating a handheld, Gal. The shots we get.
I hope he doesn't do an angry protest out there.
Bear will like even now be making a Chelsea Clinton-style package to let you know that some may like it hot, others like it lukewarm, others like it almost semi-liquid. One of the things, before we get into the details, such as they are about these protests across France, which are essentially the French people are protesting against having to work an additional 2 years for no extra return. A bill that was passed in the National Assembly, that's their equivalent of Congress or Parliament, without being put to a vote. And it caused amazing scenes of disruption in France and leads me to believe that, generally speaking, French politics, like French everything, is a little bit sexier. One of the things, though, on the ground, on the streets, in the restaurants that's fascinating is just how French people have immediately adjusted to living in the middle of a riot. It's like it's not bothering them anymore. Like me, if I was in a restaurant and outside was on fire, I feel like I would, like that, I wouldn't be able to just go and say, oh, please, excuse me, I'll have the
I think I'll skip dessert.
I might go home now because it looks like society's coming to an immediate cataclysmic end. Have a look at this first clip. It seems obvious that blasé is a French word, because that is the most blasé thing I've seen. France is burning down and no one cares. It's the same with people eating outdoors, I mean, which looks even more dramatic. Have you seen this one? Have a look. People are just carrying on. I like that the server thinks that the problem is the organisation of the chairs. Oh, monsieur, my apologies. That chair is a little crooked.
It's the angles that are the problem.
If we can just get this in proper relationship to the table, everything will be okay. The streets are on fire. Put in the coat. I mean, it's just everything's perfectly normal. Actually, I'm not sure if she works there or if she's dining there. I can't tell what's happening. Look at this one. This is like performance art, this final one. Because of the sort of musical choices, let us know in the chat and the comments how quickly you work out what song this is. It's a little quiz. If you get it right, you can come and see me in a live show. Yeah, what about that? For if you want to come, you might not want to. You might be a sort of a radical French person, happy to bring down the state because you're not being pensioned properly and democracy's being ignored, like everywhere, because your country is being led by a neoliberal stooge that went to the right school, made the right connections, organises the right tax breaks for the powerful, attends Davos conferences, may pretend to care about cultural issues, may pretend to care about inequality, as they would call it in France, but actually cares about, I don't know, corruption. Yeah?
Yeah, I reckon.
Is that enough? Just say stuff in a French accent. Will that do? Is that enough for you? Have a look at this. This is, I would say this is surreal and bizarre. Not only because people are carrying on as normal, but there's something macabre and extraordinary. And note that the keyboard player is still wearing a mask. It's a weird visual oxymoron. Danny S says, I wouldn't be able to enjoy a glass of wine with burning trash in the background. That's a very good point. If you're watching us on Rumble right now, you'll have to, because we're only going to be on YouTube for a few more minutes. You should click the red button and join our, well, I don't know what to call our club. We'll work out a name for that by the end of this week, shall we? You should join our affinity, our affiliation, our group, our crew, and then it's your comments. Oh, people are saying it, Eternal Flame. Becca D, Eternal Flame. Yeah, people recognise it's Eternal Flame. Is that, do you think that's been ironically rendered by that street musician?
I think so. Can't be a coincidence.
Eternal Flame, by the Bangles. That's how he's scoring this disruption. Gunshot gal, the gunshot, or whatever that was.
Whatever that was.
The world has become sort of performance art.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting. As a metaphor, you could argue that maybe we all have to get on with life and ignore all the awful atrocities that are going on. Just because here it's literally happening right next to them, we're ignoring something that's happening not that far away in foreign countries.
Yeah, I get it, mate. Also, Nero literally fiddled while Rome burned. The Emperor Nero, who was an early symbol of centralized authority and despotism. The Emperor Nero apparently played a fiddle. And I didn't think fiddles had been invented that long, but I suppose they must have been. Anyway, apparently while Rome was burning at the end of that particular empire, perhaps in the same way we're seeing the end of not just American empire, but its expansiveness. Because when we talk about America, we're not talking about you, American people, with all your glory and your culture and your principles and your beauty. We're talking about American institutions, American expansionism, and Americans' representation of corporatism on a global level. And the comparison between America and Rome is frequently made. How do we diagnose the end of empires? What does it feel like? How will it play out in European nations that have evident differences? You can sort of see that and feel that, but ultimately the same kind of corporatism, the same sort of commodification, the same sort of ideology that is engendered by secularism, a kind of sort of, what do I want to say, a diluted nihilism, a sort of sense of meaninglessness that's best embodied perhaps by a man playing a bloody organ in the street wearing a face mask while the culture falls apart around you. What leads people to riot? Martin Luther King said, and I must say tonight, that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it's failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity. In a sense, the idea that rioting is the language of the unheard is important. You can't have a riot on your own. A riot suggests consensus. A riot suggests that a deep psychic injury is being expressed. A riot tells us that our institutions and systems are insufficient. They are inefficient. They are unable to represent the will of people. This particular set of disturbances brought about by an undemocratic change to the pension laws is a great example, because the French feel like they have a deal, a contract with their government. We pay these taxes, and then we get to experience a little bit of a literal joie de vivre, the joy of life, the essence of life. Don't you sometimes forget that your life's meant to have a point? Like you have a purpose, you have a relationship with divinity of your own determination, that you have relationships with the people that you love, that you're allowed to decide on your own destiny, that you're not meant to be someone boxed off in order to facilitate convenience of powerful sets of interest. Victor Hugo, writer of Les Miserables, which is of course about the unrest that led to the French Revolution, in that book, and subsequent musical and all those assets. Every man who has in his soul a secret feeling of revolt against any act of the state, of life, or of destiny is on the verge of riot. And so as soon as it appears, he begins to quiver and to feel himself borne away by the whirlwind. Well, when I used to attend those kind of things when I was a younger man, what I used to enjoy was not the idea that people might be hurt or the sense of danger, but the fact that beneath order there is a kind of chaos, and that in order to facilitate change, you have to allow that chaos to, in a sense, infuse the order. And that is frightening, I think, because most of us, because there is a heightened state of fear, many of us experienced that during the pandemic. Let us know in the chat and the comments, do you feel that your culture is constantly trying to make you anxious? It's trying to enervate you so you don't feel relaxed enough to demand change, that you're kept kind of docile with the kind of palliatives and panacea of our culture, entertainment, sugar, etc., just being sort of two examples. But when you sense, hold on a minute, we could create a better world. The technology and the ideology for true democracy exists now. We could localize, we could collectivize, we could organize things differently. It's not to say that there would be no centralized authority, but it would be authority in response to the will of the people. Essentially, what they claim we already have, when what we really have are institutions that operate on behalf of corporate interests and financial and military interests and keep you distracted and subdued. Let me know in the chat and the comments if you agree with that. This is a quote from Maria. I've never said this name before, so I might say it wrong. Aliokina. We have the right to refuse. This is our right, yours and mine. You can't know all the laws by heart. You don't know what will happen if you refuse, but you have to try. I suppose this is a kind of a call for deep bravery in a time that can feel pretty frightening. You might not yet know what exactly Emmanuel Macron is all about, but you might have the same sense that I do, that he's a kind of globalist corporate stooge, that one of those people that operates on behalf of the rich, uses language about equality and diversity, a kind of, what do you want to call him, a Gaelic Trudeau figure, like just one of those people that acts like they're super nice, but in fact operates on behalf of essentially elitist interests. Well, you'd be kind of right, I reckon. He went to the École Nationale d'Administration. It's an elite French finishing school that like a lot of French leaders and CEOs and stuff attend. He came under fire after they spent 2.4 billion with consultancy firms now being investigated for tax evasions. They've just introduced a new bill that prevents you photographing the police. I guess that came about because of those yellow vest protests in France recently, which was a fascinating movement because it couldn't be dubbed right-wing or left-wing or racist, or it seemed to be a genuine, organic, populist movement. Because the fact is, we do, in a country as vast and as complex as France, there's going to be a variety of cultural interests, of different demographics. But the thing that populism is about, if you ask me, is that it's truly about allowing people to come together around the issues around which we all agree, and to temporarily suspend internal conflict around the subjects where we do have disagreements, cultural identity, etc., where there's necessarily going to have to be diversity. Also, another story about Macron is that they're using the 2024 Paris Olympics to introduce a bunch of biometric AI surveillance gear. That's like they're ushering that in under sort of the auspices of the Olympics. Of course, famously now raising the retirement age by a couple of years without so much as a vote. And during these riots, they've been using ketamine and spraying people with gas, all the usual sort of stuff, Gareth.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things that he's literally been doing these last few years is increasing the kind of police state. I mean,
has he?
Well, as we're seeing happening in the US, and certainly a crackdown on protests in this country as well, Macron's been putting loads of money into increasing that police state, militarizing exactly again like we've seen in America and as we've seen happening over the pandemic. It's similar kinds of stories over in France. They're doing the same thing, and so they're actively trying to crush dissent in ways that we're seeing across
That's like that conversation we had with Glenn Greenwald. Like, the elites are no longer interested in negotiating or appeasing the masses. They are happy instead to militarize, confident that with AI and new technology it's possible to repress dissent and crush dissenters. That's why in your country, America, you're seeing the militarization of the police force. You even saw budgets allocated to COVID aid reallocated to the militarization of the police force. That was pretty popular during those times. In our country, the UK, similarly, we're seeing the undue empowerment of sort of police forces. And by the way, this is not anti-police rhetoric. I've got friends that are in the police force, and I know a lot of people join those organizations with good, well-intentioned, community-oriented goals. And I would say consensual policing, consensual law, democratic law, be it having sort of services within your community, by your community, is a big part of our future. What we don't want are police forces that operate on behalf of the state, crushing dissent, and ultimately the sort of the military arm of the government. That's why it's interesting that after the, whatever you want to call what happened on Jan 6, insurrections, protests, riots, choose your word, one of the responses was to give billions more to the Capitol Police Force and turn them into a kind of domestic terror force. Because when they talk about terror, they're talking about you. Listen, we're only going to be on YouTube for a couple of more minutes, then we're going to click over to being exclusively on Rumble. We're going to be talking about how Rumble has been banned in France, and of course a lot of mainstream media are criticising and condemning Rumble. That's because we're doing something right. We're going to be talking too about the kind of stories that are impossible to talk about on YouTube, including fellow content creator Dr. John Campbell's recent revelations around excess deaths, which we simply cannot talk about on this platform, and how that relates to the ongoing congressional TikTok hearings currently. In fact, let's get into that now, because what's fascinating about those hearings is every single thing that they're saying about TikTok, they're responsible for themselves. TikTok is spying on you, and all the while they're being Chinese days about it, because of course social media companies in America are spying on you. Of course social media companies are in cahoots with the government. The Twitter files showed us that. One of the things that's fascinating about this story, of course, not just the corruption, not just the data capture, not just the fact that ultimately what they're looking for is TikTok to be propagandized on behalf of the state. They just want a more favorable relationship with TikTok that they presumably can't get because of its origins and national relationships. It's another of those stories that shows us that the current elites still do not understand what they're dealing with when it comes to the power of social media. That's why you have to crush dissent. That's why you have to smear independent media, and we've been on the receiving end of that, because power doesn't yet understand these new tools and technologies. And that becomes evident when you listen to dear old Mr. Hudson of North Carolina talking to the CEO of TikTok. Have a look.
Mr. Chu, does TikTok access the home Wi-Fi network?
That's like the kind of question you would ask when you're like checking into a hotel. Am I going to be able to get this on my phone? Will that show up as adult content on my hotel bill? That's like, you're conducting a congressional hearing. It's weird, isn't it?
You should be more informed, I would say.
TikTok. Is that the same thing, or is that two things? Like, it doesn't sound like he knows enough to be empowered. What's really lovely about this, maybe spool back about 5 seconds, because what I love about this is you see Mr. Shul Chu, the CEO there at TikTok, or ByteDance or Data Dance, or whatever they call that company that owns TikTok. You see him do a face that I'm familiar with as he works out, oh no, I'm talking to someone who's so much more stupid than I am, is I'm going to have to level down almost to sort of finger puppets to describe this to him. Watch him. He looks up and he's like, oh no, this geezer's an idiot. Where do I begin? Like, you know, when you're not old enough because you're young enough, but when like remote controls and that came in and we had to explain it to our nans and granddads, no, nan, you just have to, do I jab the TV with it like it's a bamboo cane? No, Nan, you can stay in your armchair. For God's sake, woman. Have a look at this.
Does TikTok access the home Wi-Fi network?
Only if the user turns on the Wi-Fi. I'm sorry, I may not understand the...
So if I have...
No, you do understand.
You do. He really is that stupid. You're dealing with someone who's... I mean, but more important than this obvious ineptitude of the investigators in this particular congressional hearing is a story or a notion that we touch on pretty frequently. How do they have the moral authority to investigate, let alone condemn TikTok, when they, check this out, politicians blast TikTok but accept its executives' donations? So you've got politicians condemning TikTok who take money from TikTok. If you think TikTok's bad, don't take TikTok's money.
No, exactly. I mean, this comes on top of what we already know about all the members of Congress and senators that own, as we always talk about, stocks and shares in the big tech companies that they regulate. Yet more hypocrisy on top of hypocrisy.
Later on, we're talking to Krystal Ball from Breaking Points. We love her and Sagaar. What do you say?
Sagaar.
I'm never confident with those kind of pronunciations. Sagaar.
Yeah.
You're uncertain. Yeah. That's the first question.
Well, no, you're making me now.
Sagaar's name? But my second question is going to be, do you believe that any current political party is capable of dealing with the deep systemic corruption that becomes evident with the money in politics issue? Why will no political party say, if you are in Congress, you cannot own stocks and shares at all? You cannot have another job. This is a problem that's been in British politics right now. Is like we find out all of the loads of the politicians got some other job where they paid a bunch more money. That we would ban that. Do not accept lobbying money. Do not accept donation money. If you made those laws, it would change the landscape of politics overnight. So even this TikTok trial currently, which will ultimately, you know, what they'll want is the ability to censor the ordinary users of TikTok. They certainly won't be trying to make institutional change within a powerful organization like that. And secondly, look at this idea. They are saying that TikTok are probably capturing and sharing your data. Well, look at this. 50 million Facebook profiles harvested for Cambridge Analytica in a major data breach. What about the CDC? All the way through, we can move on, or the CDC, all the way through the pandemic, or certainly at points of it, they used data, they captured data and used it to monitor people.
They bought data, based on people's activities during lockdown to monitor whether people were moving about or not. But again, like not actions that you would expect from your own government when we're talking about spying. So it's okay when we do it, but when China are doing it, that's what we're against.
Every single thing they're attacking TikTok for, they are culpable of accusing TikTok of having a relationship with the CCP, with the Chinese State Communist Party. They have relationships with social media companies. The only thing that I can think of is they're not Chinese. That's literally it. There's a story now. Google ordered to hand private customer data over to FBI investigators. And this seems like a good time for us to get off YouTube. There's a link in the description to Rumble. Click on that. Join us over on Rumble because we're going to do some excess deaf stuff as well as looking at the sort of relationship between Google and the FBI. For obvious reasons, we're not going to do that on YouTube. So click the link and join us over on Rumble right now. See you in a minute. Stay free in the few seconds before you make your way onto the free speech utopian platform that is Rumble. So